All right, welcome everyone to this Rulemaking Advisory Committee for the Department of State Lands. This is our third RAC meeting for undersea infrastructure easements in Oregon's territorial seas. So thanks for being here today. I'm Sylvia Chabrowski, helping to facilitate these meetings, and you probably saw the meeting is being recorded. So I'll run through our agenda and what we hope to get out of today's meeting. We have a nice packed agenda. But before I do that, maybe let's just do a round of intros from folks that are here that are on the RAC or alternates or technical advisors and staff. So let's see, let me go first to Cameron.
Hi, Cameron Fisher, Director of Marine Infrastructure with Environmental Science Associates. Thank you.
Thanks. And then Eric and Jason.
I'm Eric Chambers, Central Lincoln PUD, headquartered in Newport. I'm a RAC member.
Good morning. I'm Jason Bush with Pacific Ocean Energy Trust, poet.
Great. And Joanne and then Lene.
Hi, I'm Joanne Morris of Google, and I am a RAC member.
Lene, are you able to get off mute? All right, we'll circle back to you. Sarah and then Scott McMullen.
Hi, all. Sarah McComb. I'm with AWS and I am a RAC member.
Hi, I'm Scott McMullen. I'm on the RAC as a North Coast Commercial Fishing Representative, and I'm also chairman of the Oregon Fishermen's Cable Committee.
Okay, thanks, Scott. And then let's go to Scott Marion with our technical advisors.
Good morning, Scott Marion with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife Marine Program in Newport, technical advisor.
Thanks, Scott. And then from DSL, let's go to Danielle and then Natalia and then Dario.
Good morning, everyone. Danielle Boudreau, DSL Rulemaking Coordinator.
Good morning, Natalia Stranatka, Territorial Sea Specialist.
Hi, everyone. Dario Frazone, Proprietary Coordinator at DSL.
Perfect, thanks. Did I miss any RAC members or technical advisors or staff?
Lene?
Andy?
Hi, this is Lene Rutledge. I'm the North Coast Consumer Advisory member. I live in Tierra Del Mar, and I'm a RAC member.
Thanks, Lene. Forgot to circle back. Appreciate that.
Yeah, good morning. Andy Lanier, Marine Affairs Coordinator with Department of Land Conservation and Development.
Thanks, Andy. All right, and I see a few members, interested parties as well. So thanks for being here, and we'll have time towards the end of the meeting for public comments if you want to make a comment at that point. So with that, let's dive into the agenda. So today, just as a reminder, we're at each of these meetings, you'll kind of get some background information on the topics that we're discussing, and then we'll pull up the draft rules, the proposed rules, and get your specific feedback on the different rule sections that we're covering. So at the last RAC meeting, we talked a lot about the application process and procedures, and you provided a lot of comments there, and DSL is working through those to update the rules in response or figure out how to address your comments. And so today we are focusing on kind of the latter half of the RAC rules. So we'll start with some background on fees and compensation rates, and you'll also get some background on comparison to other states' fees and rates, and some examples applied to real life cables. And for those sets of rules on fees and compensation rates, we know that's kind of the heart of the rules for a lot of people. So we do want to make sure we hear from everyone. So when we get to discussion on that, I'll probably go around the room and make sure we hear everyone's input on the application fees and the compensation rates that are proposed. And then after that, we'll get into the part of the rules on decommissioning and recovery and encroachment easements. So we'll go through things a little bit, not quite in the order that they are in the rules, but just in order to kind of get through all the priority topics. So decommissioning and recovery, encroachment easements, and then we'll have discussion on that, pull up the rules, get your comments. And at the last RAC meeting, we did not have time to get to the intro sections of the rules on purpose and applicability, general provisions, and definitions. And for those sections, one of you sent in some comments after the last meeting, which is great. So DSL has those. But we know there are lots of topics to get through today. So we'll try to get through those if we have time. But if we don't, then we may ask for email comments on those intro sections of the rules. So that's kind of what we have for going through the rules. And then we'll have a chance for public comment towards the end of the meeting. And after today, we'll also send out any email comments that we get from RAC members. So before today's meeting, you got a packet with comments that have come in so far. And then after today's meeting, if there's comments that come in, we'll send those out to all the RAC members for awareness. So any questions on kind of agenda format, what we're doing today? Okay, great. And I see Danielle's been putting it in the chat. Just a reminder of your meeting packet. So you got the agenda, the draft rule text, which has been updated slightly. The section on compensation fees is different than what you received back in February when the first set of rules came out. So just note, we're working with an updated set. You always have that kind of crosswalk of rules, always helpful to refer to that. And Natalia put together a fees and compensation sheet and information on other states' rates that you'll be able to reference as well. So as we go through the meeting today, just a reminder of your Zoom protocols. When we get to chat sections, discussion sections, we'll just ask you to raise your hand, get in the queue, and we'll seek a balance of speaking time. And really do want to make sure we're hearing from folks, especially those that have not chimed in on the conversation. Just ask all the focused, clarifying questions you need to understand the rules and make your comments. Suggestions for changes are always welcome beyond just sort of comments or what you see as concerns in the rules. Want to hear what are your proposed solutions to change them. And also, if there are major suggestions coming up through conversation, we may just ask other RAC members to, how is this landing with you? Try to get some level of agreement or see where all the different perspectives are. So that is all for the intro section. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Natalia and to provide some background on fees and compensation rates and kind of comparison to other states. And after she does that, we'll pull up those sections of the rules to get your comments. And just a reminder, that's sections 0854 and 0855. And I will try to get, input from everyone on those. I'll put those rule sections in the chat just so that you're clear on what we're going to be talking about right after Natalia's presentation. Okay, over to you, Natalia.
Good morning, everyone. So let's start. Here is our overview of presentation for today. And as Sylvia already mentioned, we will have two parts. We did this for several reasons to make logic. I mean, it's not in the same order as in you see in the rules, to make it more logically, and then also incorporate a bunch of answers to your question that we received from Sylvia after she did interview with the RAC members. So we will have a presentation going through the first about a little bit back about the state fee research that DSL did and the current proposed fee and compensation rate given to real case examples, and we will have questions, discussing rule, and then we will come back to the part 2 about decommissioning and recovery and encroachment easement application process. Also give you a couple of examples from the real world. Next slide, please. So here is just a reminder that I showed this diagram during the RAC 2 meeting that you see the red circle that today I will be talking a little bit about the result of the DSL fee research from the coastal state that we did in 2025. And you could see that last RAC meeting we discussed result of the DSL interview in general that we ask different company and internal DSL staff how should application process should review. So today we will dive a little bit more about fee research and also propose fee and compensation rates that required by Senate Bill 793. The next slide. So here is just overview, the map of the coastal state we try to reach out. We reach out 22 states, coastal states, and we by mail, and we got 12 responded. I would like to highlight that this research was done just with the DSL staff capacity. We just try to understand what fees should we establish that Senate bill asks us to make it attractive and fair compared to other states. So it was not the type of research that, for example, agency hire external consulting or research institute to do that research. So there is no expectation that we have kind of research fee report. It was completely done by DSL staff in our time. So we got this 12 states responded that we tried to analyze. And based on that, next slide, please. We sent email different questionnaire and we asked different question. What is the name of the permission they use? What is fee payment or methodology state using? How often do they revise fee? Do they have separation standard? Do they require inspection? Do they require decommissioning? Those questions we try to understand what should we put in our rule. And this is the answer the most common we receive from those 12 states. In all different states, the permission for use of the seafloor, they call it differently. It could be easements, it could be just permit, it could be lease. Fee established, again, there is no single methodology that state use. They choose it based on the state interest and public benefits, but most of them, they use per lineal foot, but also sometimes they mix with, they decided case by case. They use negotiation just for cable. It's not established explicitly in some rules. Sometimes they use square foot. And decision come out based on legislation. It could be scheduled they publish every year, or it could be appraisal. They revise, different states revise sometimes every 5 years, sometimes annually. They adjust fee structure in some cases on CPI index, in some cases just all different internal and external factors. And most states require decommissioning and recovery in the end of the infrastructure life cycle. Next slide, please. Yes, and here is, as I already mentioned, there is no single method for fee calculation across the state. But most of them, they use per lineal foot. And this is the graph you see. It's comparison only this one method because you could see at least the trend and how much do they charge. Because like square foot, again, it's case by case, but it just 2 or 3 states using that in conjunction with the also per lineal foot. So they may decide, depends on case by case, what type of methodology they want to apply. And it's again based on the negotiation. So you could see per lineal foot how other coastal states charge. And based on that, we propose $3 per lineal foot in our new rules. So and you could see that it's quite comparative with the other states. And I would say it's quite low in comparison, considering then the number of cables increasing in the next future years. Next slide, please. You don't see Washington State there, and there was a question. We want to see the Washington example. I didn't put Washington in that graph because Washington doesn't use per lineal foot methodology. And here is, I only just want to give this example in comparison with Oregon, California, and Washington. So we saw that graph for US coastal states, but now we look at our neighbors. make sure that application fee, I would like to explain this because when you first time look at that, it's just so $25 and we had 5,000. The 5,000 application fee, it's a little bit the content, what is going there. It's a little bit different than meaning in California and Washington. So when I had a conversation with our neighbors, $25 application fee, it's only that fee for software, basically when applicants go to the website and fill out application form and submit it. So this is application fee they consider. And 5,000, again, this is current situation, what we have in our old rules in Oregon. It's only 5,000 application fee. And in DSL case, application fee, we meant it's already included administrative cost and staff time. In California and Washington, it's different. They have application fee just for that software submission of the application through the website. But then they have a separate like administrative fee. This is where the staff time come in and all other review procedure. And for example, in California, they call it approximate expense deposit based on different category. But that 20,000, that usually they require application fee in advance for undersea cable in the territorial sea. Even so, 20,000 for undersea cable, it's a minimum that I got explanation from them. If time of their staff staff time require more documents review or sometimes go into the field and etc., more time to review, then it will lead to higher cost, more than 20,000 for the staff time. Then they bill separately to the company and ask them to pay for those staff time. That's a California case, and you could see California use annual rental fee as well. And Washington, again, they name it differently, charge for tenure of easements, and they don't use per lineal foot. They use kind of lengths in miles. And then they have also annual rental fee and administrative fee percentage from the general easement standard they charge. I also would like to highlight, that's why it's different to compare. There is no single methods or that you can have this trend. Each state is completely different, and mostly you will hear the answer is case by case. It depends on so many factors and etc. But this is kind of a general overview. I want to highlight that other states in California, Washington as well, this is fee structure they use basically for all utilities, uplands and in the territorial sea, for cables and other utilities. In our case, our Division HS3 and fee structure apply only to the territorial sea. So that's a different a little bit, and it's affect how we choose methodology, our methods and formula that I will be talking in the next slide. So considering all of those state examples, and we try to understand what factors should we, choose and to make the formula really applicable to our states and public interest and etc. And considering that some states, they have annual rate, some of them, they have revised fee structure every 5 years, some of them use per lineal foot, some square foot. All of those things, next slide, please. Our approach, DSL approach, we use 3 main factors. Make it simple, make it predictable for the company, and make it reliable. So that's why, considering Senate Bill 793 requirements, the DSL should establish application fee, renewal application fee, and compensation rate. Using those three main factors, we come up with this formula for compensation rates, $3 per lineal foot. Also make it simple using just term we have for the easements, diameter, if it could be pipeline or something else, and fixture that we apply square foot to make it simple. All compensation rate are going to the common school fund. And application fee, we had only $5,000 before. In the new rules, we proposed 15,000, and that numbers and renewal 7,500. That's covering DSL administrative cost. And we come up with that number also like talking with our internal staff, proprietary coordinator, how many hours they use to review application, how many other specialists and staff do we need to involve, and that's application fee covering the staff time, also covering all the costs that DSL need to organize JAD, for example, under the new requirements, Territorial Sea Plan Part 4, reviewing documents, preparation for the State Land Board meeting, consultation with the Department of Justice that also DSL need to pay money for that, and etc. If something else needed, reviewing additional documents and public informational meeting. So that's why we come up with this 15,000 of application fee. To make it simple, to make it clear, and to make it predictable for the company, we had this from the back to the interview in 2023. And considering all the state review, here is what we have, and we are open for that discussion. And next time we'll give, we'll call it Dario, he will give a couple of examples, real example, how much, based on this new proposed formula, how much it cost our recent new easements and renewal easement that we had. And this is just for demonstration purposes.
Thanks, Natalia.
Please, Dario.
Thank you. Yeah, we thought it would be helpful to run through two examples, one of the most recent cable easement for Division 83 that's been issued. I know a few people in the room will be very familiar with this example that worked with me on issuing this easement. It's for the Bifrost cable, this example. And as Natalia said, this is just for demonstration purposes to show what our new compensation or proposed compensation rates might look like for this example in particular. This cable had a bore pipe that was approximately 3,615 feet, and information from the application said it would be about 6 to 7 inches. So to be more conservative, I used the larger figure of 7 inches. That's not information that we collect currently after the fact. So what the actual construction was or length was, I'm not sure, but this is the best information that I could find in the application in the file history. And the cable length outside, so from the end of the bore pipe to the route that it took to the end of the territorial sea, was about 15,738 feet. And the application said that it was going to be a cable with about a 1.5 inch diameter. So using those calculations, or using those variables, the calculation of the total compensation for this easement, as an example, would have been about $2,462,580 under the proposed rules. Those revenues would go to the Common School Fund. And we can look at the next slide. This is an example from a renewal application that was completed. As I mentioned previously, we don't typically collect bore pipe information or information about the cable diameter. So I wasn't able to find exactly if there even was a bore pipe used for this cable. I'm pretty sure there was. That's a typical construction method. But I had to leave the bore pipe length and diameter unknown, so I didn't factor those in. And I'm not sure what the cable diameter is for this example either. But if you just looked at the length of the cable, which is around 18,558 feet, and you just assumed that it was less than 3 inches in diameter, the compensation rate for this example for the Alaska North Star cable would be about $1,113,120 under the proposed rules. Next slide.
All right. Thank you so much for that presentation. And I want to go to the RAC now to see if there's any clarifying questions. We're going to have plenty of time for discussion. So right now, don't want to quite hear comments yet on what you just heard, but more just clarifying questions so that the group can get the information that you need in order to provide comments. So I see some hands, so I'll go to Joanne and then Sarah and Cameron.
Yeah, my question is for Dario. Dario, did you share any information about what the encroachment easement would be at the end of the 20 years if the cable was left?
Yeah, we're going to be looking at examples for encroachment easements later in the presentation.
Okay.
So we will
So
cover.
you do share that with,
yeah,
like, for example, the Bifrost owners and the Alaska North Star owners?
I'm not going to be using those as examples, but I will be using actual encroachment easements. The department's issued 2 encroachment easements for different uses in the territorial sea. So I'll be looking at those examples that are real world examples of encroachment easements that we have and showing the compensation rate under the proposed rule. Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, Joanne. And Sarah?
I have 2 questions. So for the calculation example that was used on Bifrost, cable length 15,738 feet, bore pipe 3,615 feet.
Yeah.
Are we double counting the cable inside the bore pipe?
No, the bore pipe, including the cable, is counted, and then continuing on with the cable from the exit from the HDD location.
Okay, and what is the start point for where it's calculated? Is it calculated from the beach manhole, or is it calculated from the low tide, wherever the jurisdiction is?
The calculation would be the line of ownership for GSL state-owned lands. I believe at this location it was ordinary high water.
Okay. And then a question for Natalia on the state comparisons, the annual this slide here, the use rental fee, the 9.5% for Washington, the annual fee. Where did that come from? I'm not aware of any annual fee in Washington state. You're on mute.
Yeah, thanks for the question. This has come up, they publish annually. This probably would be higher this year, but this is what they share last year when I reach out to them. It looks like it's not explicitly saying in some study or whatever. It's kind of department revise on each year, and they publish this schedule every year. And this is what they gave also in the survey when I tried to clarify what it is. And so this is what come up. That's why, like, when I presented those fee state research, sometimes it took us half a year to get that data. You see, like now it's simple graph, but they not always want to share those costs. And sometimes you need to follow up, and then you need to find exactly the agency that actually responsible for that, because permitting process is even more complicated than in Oregon. It was quite a time. But I also want to emphasize that federal government also doing survey, tried to revise the fee structure. A couple of years ago, U.S. Department of Interior, we know this because they reach out to us asking how much Oregon charge for that. So they are doing that survey as well. Yeah, they have separate appraisal. Some other federal agency hire research institute to do that research to revise the fee. California also started doing their survey of other states to see if they need to revise $5 per linear foot. And also there is a tendency on the East Coast to do the survey for other states as well. So because the ocean become more populated and more cable come up with the high capacity we need, considering AI development, they start to do that kind of market research.
Cameron?
Yeah, I had two questions. One was basically Sarah's point on the 9.5 rental fee. I know in 2008, Washington transferred over to a one-time fee. So Natalia, I can connect you on someone at DNR to help you revise that if you'd like. But yeah, I had a question on that. And the second question I had was on the slide with the coastal undersea cables. New York seemed like it was quite an outlier compared to everyone else. I'm assuming that's factoring in offshore wind and their power cables as well. Just want to confirm on that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because the fee, of course, it depends how many cables. Is it competition there? Yes, and that's for power cable, offshore wind, and East Coast, they have it. That's why it's higher. Even like Virginia, yeah, they do have now pilot project, but they plan that offshore wind. Yeah, but that's outlier. And we could expect that in the future. With Washington, I would say I reach out to people. There is a different opinion, so I'm not responsible for Washington, but this is what I hear from them. Those numbers, one person, they responded that that's basically because, again, they consider terrestrial land as well. It's more applicable to the uplands calculation. With the territorial sea, it's a little bit difficult. And that's why another person mentioned that we usually have negotiation for each cable in the territorial sea. And just gave me an example, like one cable that was landed in 1990 something, the company already paid more than 1 million.
Yeah.
That was like 25 years ago. So it's hard to find and tell exactly this is payment. Even when I try to ask, the answer is case by case. So many factors should be considered.
Well, a cable hasn't landed in Washington since 1999, so that's part of it.
Well, following up on yeah, agreed. You know, yeah, it's been a long time since fiber cables coming to Washington.
Yeah, but we just want to be transparent how we determine this fee and show that we did dive deeply and try to ask as much as possible Stan to understand what should we come up with the fee structure.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I also want to reiterate what Natalia said before. This was an informal study with the information that was provided to DSL that they could gather. So appreciate that this is being presented to this group and probably shouldn't be considered, you know, the last final answer for what's happening in each of these states, but just some information to consider.
Yeah,
Jason?
I even don't know if other states actually have this graph and comparison. I mean, they're publicly available.
Yeah, a couple observations and questions here. One, I was curious about the 3-inch and greater. Sorry, something's come back. We know she has spoken. Whatever. 3 inches or greater, you're then this additional factor that you add into the equation, and I'm that number, of course. Because of that additional factors drives the number up fairly quickly based upon the additional size. I'm kind of curious from the industry's perspective, is that unusual? Does it disincentivize a methodology that may have some advantages? Is it normal other states to have the different rates for different size cables, larger, smaller than 3 inches? That's my first question.
Well, maybe Natalia, did you find in your research that there was a difference between diameter sizes in calculating the compensation rate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, when I follow up, we added diameter. California, this is one of the methods. They use complex. They use benchmark methodology. They use per lineal foot. They use sometimes diameter, and they use appraisal. But with the California, for example, in the Commission of State Land, they have separate appraisal inside the agency as a permanent staff who calculated everything, and then they negotiate with the company. We don't have that. Yes, but we considering that all those answers, sometimes they use square foot, even if it's pipeline. So maybe not diameter, but they use square foot. And that's why we added diameter, because of the simplicity. We don't know, pipeline could be bigger, and 3 inches, most, and industry can correct me, we try to research most fiber optical cables, they'll follow to that, under that category. And then more power cables, of course, they have bigger diameter and could be pipeline, which is much more bigger. Yeah. So that's why we added for simplicity, again, predictability. And some state they're using the diameter as well. Sometimes they use the square foot, as I mentioned. But again, there is no like specific one methods that they apply.
I appreciate it. I guess what sort of sticks with me is, why does it cost the applicant more for a cable that's 4 inches than one that's 3 inches? How could that possibly matter?
So highest possible metal, so it's occupied more space on the seabed because the cable is in diameter more wider.
But you're leasing a path, as I recall, it was a minimum of 15 feet or something like that. What does it matter if you got a 2-inch cable or a 4-inch cable or an 8-inch cable? How does that, is buried? Why does that matter? I mean,
so
I don't have, I guess to me, I'm just sort of almost a layman on this. I'm kind of curious, like, why would that matter? What are you getting at?
So the 15 feet that you mentioned, that's not new. It was in our division, I think 123. It was just not in the division 83. That's a minimum easements. It doesn't mean that that's 15. Different case by case, we have sometimes easements wider that. But here is based because we considering all undersea infrastructure, cables, pipelines, and also fixture. That's how much the seabed and space occupied. Of course, you need to pay different numbers and different costs for that. So I'm not sure I understand why it's matter. It's matter because it's different number of land on the seabed that you occupied.
Yeah, thanks. And let's just spend another minute with this, Jason. I think I understand, like, from your perspective, it doesn't seem like the width should matter that much in creating a higher rate. And that's a fair comment. I think we're here to hear all those comments, but
Yeah.
I want to make sure we kind of are able to hear from everyone. But Daria, do you have another answer to that question?
I was just looking at it as like, an impact on state-owned land. So you could have a minimum threshold from 3 inches and lower in diameter, and then above that, you're kind of starting to calculate more for the additional impact or use of state-owned land. So I think that was, possibly the idea behind having that separation of diameter and that scaling fee for the greater diameter.
Fair enough. I just wanted to understand the sort of the logic behind that. The other question I had for you is, you mentioned earlier as you were describing the sort of the state surveys, that some states treat the upland and the in-water the same in terms of these easement costs. And I'm curious, spending my career with ocean-based things in Oregon, everything is, you might as well just add an order of magnitude of cost and complexity to everything we do. But if other states treat in-water and upland the same, why do we treat ours differently?
Would you like me to take this one? I think it has to do with trust lands versus non-trust lands. And trust lands are outlined in the Constitution, and those were the lands given to the state upon statehood. And that is those are constitutional lands, and generally are uplands. And then all the other lands are statutory lands, and the reason and non-trust lands. And the reason for that differentiation is the revenues that go to the common school fund from each of those different types of lands goes into different, one goes into a constitutional fund, one goes into a statutory fund. So a lot of it has to do with money and not commingling them at certain points.
That's a great answer. Thank
You're
you.
welcome. You're welcome.
We have different management responsibilities for
There's
trust
that too.
lands and non-trust lands. So for trust lands, there's an obligation to generate revenue for the common school fund, whereas the obligations for the non-trust lands are more geared toward public trust values. Any overwater easements issued for non-trust lands for communication lines or service lines like this are typically exempt from paying compensation. So that has historically been the case, and the territorial sea is considered non-trust lands. So up until now, it's been exempt from compensation for these types of uses.
Thank you.
All right, our folks hear me?
Sylvia, you're freezing up. Okay. While Sylvia's figuring that out, I'm just gonna jump in. Hello everyone again. Do we have any more
Can you
questions?
hear me?
You're breaking up a lot.
Okay, I'm gonna try to go here onto my phone, but I do want to move into the discussion period if we're able to. I don't know if folks can hear me. Is it getting better?
It's patchy, but I can go ahead and move us to the rule language while you switch to your phone if you want.
Okay, yeah, let's move into the rules. And if you're able to hear me, I hope you can. I'd love to just go around the room and hear from each of the RAC members your overall comments on the application fees and the compensation rates. So kind of just really go one by one through each of the RAC members here, maybe a couple minutes each on your comments for application fees and compensation rates. And I will start with Cameron and then go to Eric. So I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but we want to hear from everyone. So Cameron, over to you, just your kind of thoughts on application fees, compensation rates. Do you feel like they're fair? Would you suggest any changes to better meet Oregon's goals?
Well, to be fair, I don't really have a dog in the fight in the sense that I represent a client versus I am a client. So it's not my wallet, I suppose. That said, the new easement fee, we saw compared to, say, Washington, where I'm based, it's a $25 application fee versus a $15,000. We have increased quite substantially from $5,000 to $15,000. So it's a bit of a shift to the right. I do want to understand how the encroachment fee and the new application fee merge together, or how they are assigned. Because if you're looking at that, you are going from $5,000 to, was it $22,500? So I'd like to understand how that plays into it. And then are we talking about the easement fee itself with the Bifrost example that Dario showed?
I mean, we're talking about the compensation fee and the application fee in general. So if you want to consider that example, then that's fine, because that is how it would be applied in practice.
Yeah, so if I can touch on that, we're going from about a $300,000 to $2.4 million. So that's a significant change, obviously. But what concerns me, or I I think from a representative for an applicant, you have a 20-year easement, and then you go and pay another 1.1 million, I think, with the Bifrost example. So we're now at $3.5 million. That's a substantial change as well. So I think we've got to consider that. So with that, I'll pause.
Okay, that's helpful. And Dario, I see your hand up. Did you have a response?
Well, I just wanted to clarify one thing that Kim had mentioned, because I don't think we've gone over it, was the $300,000 figure that he mentioned. So these territorial sea fiber optic cable easements have traditionally been issued without any compensation. So applicants could have obtained easements for $0 besides the application fee. I think it's really important to distinguish that in some cases, on a case-by-case basis, applicants didn't want to retain template language in our easements that required future impositions. If rules were to change, they could have been assessed fees based on rule changes for uses that were already established, retroactively, right, for these easements that were issued freely. So in order to negotiate that removal of the future imposition clause language from these easements, on a case-by-case basis, the department has negotiated out those future imposition requirements or options for a fee. Typically, that fee has been $300,000. So I think it gets muddled a little bit with compensation, but I just want to distinguish that we do have some easements that have been issued 100% free that retain the future imposition language. And we do have easements, probably more easements that have opted to negotiate out that term and, paid $300,000 for the negotiating the future imposition language out of the agreement. So it's just distinct from compensation.
Yeah, thanks, Dario. Helpful.
Thank you.
Cameron, did you have a follow-up? Sorry.
No, I just want to say thanks to Dario for the clarification. Thank you.
And Natalia, do you have a quick response?
Yeah, I just want to touch the Cameron. You mentioned shift $25 compared to California and Washington, $5,000. Again, $25, that's only for submission of application for the software. It's not how it's included administrative cost. So if you look at the California, if it's 20,000 right now already. So you cannot compare because the formula is different what is included in application fee. $25, again, this is just for, so you click in and submit application on the website, but administrative cost, they use this separate category. In our case, application fee, it's a combination, cover everything currently, all administrative costs and at the same time, submission through the website. So I want to make clear that it's not shifting with that. Currently, California charged $20,000 in the territorial sea minimum as an application fee, we called it, that include administrative costs and staff time and etc.
So, sorry, can you clarify then on Washington State then? Because the way I can appreciate the California comparison, but if you're a cable owner, and I'm going to call out, say, Sarah or Joanne here on the call, they're going to want to de-risk their system. So California being one area, and then the Pacific Northwest, either Washington, Oregon, for another one. So they'll have a branching unit potentially. So it de-risks the system. So your competition in that sense would be California versus, say, Washington, Oregon up in the Northwest. So my question then would be, how does Washington then factor in their application fees? Is that built into their easement fee? Because right now you only pay $25. So, going in. So can you walk me through that?
Again, when I show in the table, Washington has separate administrative fee, which is 20% from the easements itself. That's in the table. $25, it's only for submission application online. It's not application fee itself with the staff time spent for reviewing the application. The same with Washington. It's just different. California has 20,000, and Washington charged 20% from that easement case by case.
So can you walk me through then, how does Washington factor in that fee? Once you submit your $25 for the easement, is that part of the easement fee, or are you paying in addition to the easement and $25? Because where I'm trying to tease out is, how does Washington then come to a conclusion of fee so that we can compare apples to apples of Oregon? Because your competition in the sense of attracting cables is Washington, because you're going to de-risk with California. So how does Washington then determine a fee, administrative fee, not the application fee?
Well, I cannot speak for the Washington how they determine, because in our case, we use how much time our staff using in reality.
And Natalia, I don't think that's quite the question. I just want to jump in because I know we're Cameron, I hear you on trying to compare apples to apples. And I think Natalia was trying to say before that it simply is not an apples to apples comparison, and that Washington they have an administrative fee that's 20% of the fee of the easement, and other fees that just aren't included in Oregon. So maybe that's the answer.
Maybe, yeah. Okay.
Of the easement. So which would likely be quite a bit higher than $5,000.
Okay.
So I just want to kind of make sure that we're able to hear from other folks too. Does that help?
Yeah. Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. Okay. So I'll move on to Eric, and then Jason, and then Lene, to hear your overall thoughts on the application fee and compensation rates. So Eric, over to you first.
I think from an electric utility perspective, we don't anticipate this being relevant for us, so I don't have any comments on this section.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Then Jason.
Yeah. I think it's important to remember, though, Erica, you say that it doesn't matter to CLPUD, but this also applies to electrical cables, of course. And if we do any kind of marine energy or offshore wind, then these costs, of course, it will not apply to your electrical cables. Natalia, you're saying no?
So I agree with that concern and have raised that separately. As I understand it, electric facilities are not addressed under this rule. Although I have concerns with the exemption language. So when we get to that section, I'll definitely have things that I want to raise.
Well, just to clarify this a little bit, so ocean renewable energy facilities would be covered under a different division of rules, would be covered under Division 140. So that has a different compensation factor and includes any kind of like a facility, so wave energy or wind energy generating device, but also the associated infrastructure to help with that use. So the cables would be included under Division 140.
That's the part that I think needs to be shored up a little bit. It's not clear to me that transmission is overtly covered. So I think in the language, again, that's not in this section, but I think that I would like to see that tightened up.
Agreed 100%. Dario, I must admit, it was my understanding that, of course, the lease site for a wave energy device or a wind turbine, there's not going to be one in state waters, but if you would lease that space, but the cable would be handled under Part 4, was my understanding. Apparently, I'm wrong about that.
Okay, let's see. Territorial Sea Plan Part 4. Maybe Andy can speak to this, the distinction between Territorial Sea Plan Part 4 and 5 for this type of a use. Because my understanding would be that renewable energy facility cable would be evaluated under Territorial Sea Plan Part 5.
Evaluated, but we're talking about the fees for the cable coming to shore, right?
That would be, so if there's a distinction between Territorial Sea Plan requirements and DSL OAR. And so if you're looking at what DSL OAR it's being authorized under, the renewable ocean energy facility uses would be authorized under Division 140.
So I'm looking at the definitions in this in 141. Cable means a conductor of electricity or light. So that's why, just on its face, I assume that everything we're talking about here applies not only to data cables, but to electrical cables coming to shore.
It would count for electrical cables, but not for renewable ocean energy facilities. I think those are included in the exclusions from the introduction of the rules. I can't remember what section, but it's like the very first start, the purpose and applicability.
And those are the comments that I've sent to Sylvia, because it does overtly mention the renewable ocean energy facilities. It doesn't overtly mention related transmission. So that's why I think that's the very important thing that needs to get addressed in that section.
Eric, I think I see what you're saying. And I think part of that is because under the Division 140 definitions of ocean energy renewable facilities, it includes the cables.
Yeah, I'd rather be duplicative in both rules. I think we can.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Natalia, did you want to respond about that as well?
Yeah, just to clarify, yes, Daria mentioned Division 140, that's for renewable energy facility, including all associated structure, including cables. That, Jason, you mentioned Territorial Sea Plan Part 4 and 5. Yes, renewable energy facility, that's governed by the Part 5. Yes, and there is a language that if there is a cable associated with that renewable energy facility, the JAR, Joint Agency Review meeting, should be gathered in conjunction with Part 4, which is for cables and other utilities. And that language, yes, that's a little bit separate, that we have our different divisions, and we're in the process to be aligned all part of the territorial sea in the future. Particularly now, there is a tendency, and DLCD and APAC, they are planning of revise Part 1 and 2 of the territorial sea plan, and Part 4 and 5 again, to be aligned everything. So yes, and future discussion, we will need to discuss in DSL based on the territorial sea plan future amendment. Do we want to keep Division 140 as a separate for the renewable energy facility, or should we have just one division for all territorial sea? That would be future discussions. Yeah, but for now, we are not covering renewable energy power cables from renewable energy facility. And Eric, to your comments, yeah, we will consult with Department of Justice, because sometimes there is suggestion we don't need to repeat, when we need just to reference to the rules. But yeah, with that clarification, we will consult.
I think the feedback, at least for me as a RAC member, is that we do need to, even if it's not legally required.
Yeah, and so just to jump in, so it sounds like, Eric, there's some clarifications that can be made to the definition section here, and you did provide some language and comments in writing, so can look at that and help appreciate that. Just need some more clarity on what is and is not covered here.
Yeah, thank you. That's why we just covered that this division doesn't cover those facility and structure that covered under Division 140. And if you look at 140, there is like definition for renewable energy facility. Yeah, we may include this just to duplicate. Thank you for the.
Well, to complete my comments, sort of riffing on what Cameron said, I don't really have a dog in the fight. My observation as an Oregonian would be, I think it's important for the state to find that balance point where you're receiving fair compensation for staff and the needs of the state and the cost, while also getting fair value for the easements to contribute to the state's funding. So at the same time, balancing that against, of course, disincentivizing these important infrastructure plays in Oregon. So, that's just my sort of overarching perspective on it. And I feel like you all are sort of moving in that direction clearly by, putting yourself in the middle of the pack in terms of the initial fees. But that's just my overarching observation.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I think that's good framing for everyone. The intent of the rules is to find that balance between compensation rates that fairly compensate DSL for their staff time and for the Common School Fund, to Oregonians for using the cables, but not so much that they disincentivize folks from landing cables here. So that's good framing, as other people make their comments too. Like, do you think the right balance is being struck here? So I'll move to Lene and then over to Joanne and Sarah to hear your thoughts on these fees. Joanne?
Oh, I thought Lene was going to go first.
I'm sorry. Yes, Lene. Thank you. A little bit discombobulated with not being able to connect via my computer. I'm so sorry. Go ahead, Lene.
Okay, thank you. I appreciated at the beginning in Natalia's presentation that the state is looking at simplicity and predictability. I think those are two really important factors. I want to make sure that when this moves forward that we clarify that the $25 application fee is really only for software for comparable states, because I think that will always cause confusion. So making sure there's a reference to that. I will always work backwards to how I believe we as the state of Oregon have been perceived in the past as essentially being cheap and easy. So I'm hopeful that by moving forward, we're going to have that balance that Jason talked about of both fair cost and benefit. And I don't want to ever lose sight of that benefit. And I think that to me as a person who lives in a coastal community that has been impacted by the cable process, I really respect that what we're trying to do is move forward. And I think that we never factor in how much industry makes from all of this. But I do think that we're at least moving in the direction that we're generating more revenue for the Common School Fund, and I'm supportive of that. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lene. And Lene, do you feel like the rules are striking that right balance to you? The compensation rates and fees here?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I think to me, they're minimally acceptable, but yes, I do.
All right. That's helpful. Thank you. Joanne, over to you.
Okay. I'm going to start by saying that I don't think cable owners have ever thought of Oregon as cheap and easy to land a cable. When Google was a part of the consortium, we landed a cable in 2016 in Oregon. The other consortium members were telecommunication companies based in Asia, and they didn't want to go to Oregon. They wanted to go to California. And we convinced them to land in Oregon because we had a data center up in the Dalles. And we know that fiber optic cables are good for Oregon's economy and that they basically help our young people with jobs and staying in Oregon, building careers there. So over the years, I've had my children go through the Oregon school system, and I would like to see them stay in Oregon and build their lives there. But they are attracted to California because California is big industry, right? I think that these fees would have to, you have to, which is why I asked Dario, you have to look at also the encroachment fee for the easement. So if I put in for a approval to land a cable in Oregon, I have to tell my organization exactly how much it's going to cost. Worst case, which would be if the cable is left in the Oregon waters for whatever reason. And it is a lot of money. It has gone up drastically from the initial, say, $300,000 that we paid back in 2016. So I think the fees are too high, and that I think they should be reduced for obviously most of the cables that land in Oregon, probably all of them, are consortium cables. They're groups of companies that have come together to pay for the cable and all the fees and everything that costs the infrastructure. They drive industry within the state. They drive more fiber connectivity within the state. They bring internet access to, the individuals, the communities of the state. They are good for the economy of Oregon. You want to stay attractive to landing cables in Oregon.
That's helpful, Joanne. And you feel like these rates are not attractive to landing cables in Oregon. Is there a proposal that you have that would be something different?
Well, that's what I'm saying. You have to consider the encroachment fee as well, right? So the combination of the two fees is like cost prohibitive.
Okay, so important to look at, look at all the fees collectively. Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. All right. I think I said that next would be Sarah and then over to Scott McMullen.
Sure. So echoing a lot of what Joanne has said, providing a couple more specifics. So agreed. I want to find a balance to make sure that we are not deterring investment into Oregon. I think sort of the most specific recommendation I could give at this point in time for the application fee, we'll go into the encroachment next, but not the application fee, but for the compensation of the easement itself, I would like to see the uplift for basically the increase over 3 inches in diameter be removed from data cables. So clearly what would come into play there, because the data cable does not exceed 3 inches. So clearly what comes into play is the HDD. The bore pipes, the HDDs are done. They are basically required to protect both the state as well as the cable, as well as the fishing community. So it is a benefit overall that it's being done. And so to my knowledge, we don't even have the option to not do it. So therefore, adding this uplift in fee and this uplift based on the diameter, which can create sort of a lot of variables there, it comes across as punitive when we are looking to try and provide a protection for everyone involved when we build these systems. So keeping the $3 per linear foot, personally, fine. I'm okay with that. But I would like to see the uplift of the diameter, basically above 3 inches, be removed as applies to data cables. On the encroachment fee, if we're going in that direction, similarly.
Actually, Sarah, I will let you hold on encroachment fee because we're going to do a whole other piece on that.
Whole other section on encroachment fees.
We're getting there. No worries. Yeah.
All right. So that one, let me just go back to my notes real quick and see if there's anything else specifically on, because we skipped over decommissioning recovery for a moment. The other thing, just to kind of more information than not, on the smart cable discount, while great, comes across as a great idea, and I don't necessarily object to it, it is not going to be as applicable as you may think it will be. Basically, it will be limited to systems that remain entirely within territorial waters, which are going to be mostly educational systems, which, if that's what you're going for, fantastic. But the reality is, at this point in time, I can't put sensors on an international cable system because the people at the other end will object to the fact that I have US smart sensors on a system. So it's actually not going to benefit the vast majority of the systems that you have coming into these waters to have this discount, sort of just as a FYI there. That's, I think, yeah. So it's basically, yeah, we're in general, just the compensation fees are too high.
Yeah, yes. That's okay. Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that. All right, let's go to Scott McMullen.
Natalia and Dario have their hands up.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Natalia and Dario.
Thank you so much. I was thinking about one question, but then it's good, Sarah, that you address sensor, because if someone can have some comments on that.
Yes.
The first one, the 3 inches, you mentioned, yes, and I agree that telecommunication cables usually doesn't exist more than 3 inches. But we put that's why we put it there. That's $3. That's for telecommunication cables will be more fun. But we need to consider that this is for all undersea infrastructure. And some like power cables could be more than 3 inches. Pipelines, maybe it wastewater. It's a really big pipeline. Maybe in the future it could be hydrogen pipeline. So that's why we do need to consider diameter. Yeah, we can apply square foot because it's bigger, but we decided to use diameter based on that state research. So that's removing them. Then we need to find different methodology.
And I have zero objection to the diameter coming into play for other types of infrastructure, especially when that infrastructure is consistent in its sizing. That makes total sense to me. My point was specifically to telecommunications data cables, because we have to use the HDD. When you take that HDD portion and you put that in, that is what is causing a serious uplift in cost. And so that's my point, is that we're trying to do something good here in protecting the cable with the HDD. So that's why my request was to remove it specific to telecommunications cables, essentially.
So Sarah, are you thinking of, like something, I know we were talking about simplicity as one of our kind of focus goals, but are you suggesting like an exemption for the bore pipe specifically for data cables?
Yeah, essentially.
So like the alternative would be charge compensation for the full length of the cable, but exempt the bore pipe for these types of uses.
Yes.
Okay, that's helpful. So it might not be quite as simple and elegant of a formula, but could provide an exemption that's helpful to the telecoms industry. Yeah, Natalia again, and then Cameron, if you have responses to this, and then I want to make sure we get to Scott on his comments.
Yeah, and then I want to address the second one about the sensor. And back to Gian, yes, we do understand that the telecommunication cables, they're important. They provide services. And we cannot do this meeting without that right now. We do understand that this is critical infrastructure, but again, we need to find that balance between statute requirements, environmental protection, that's, more ocean activity happening right now. And it's not just undersea infrastructure, but mariculture, all different other types. And we need somehow to regulate and understand and raise money to compensate the public. But we do understand, that's why we try to find that balance. With the sensor, yes, I agree. And that's why we corrected, it's not just smart cable. DSL is member observer of the Smart Cable Initiative. DSL also just recently become member of the International Cable Protection Committee. We try to follow, understand the industry, what the challenges there, what they have. And with the sensor, we suggested the new language that it's not just smart cables. Yes, we had a conversation with the International Cable Protection Committee about that. We have with the Smart Cable Initiative. We had conversation with our university who already cooperated with some cable company, and they use fiber to dedicate the existing cable to do some research on wave regimes. We had a conversation. We had a conversation with the company that produced those sensors. Yes, we understand. It's very new. And we understand that the purpose of telecommunication cables originally, yes, and it's for the commercial purposes to provide the services. It's not for research purposes. And yes, we understand that. That's why we make it volunteer, just try to encourage if someone to give that window of opportunity for some company that maybe in the future they want to have those sensors. You never know. And we will talk about decommissioning. It could be the possibility that old cable can be dedicated as a scientific cable and etc. But it's not compulsory. For example, like Portugal tried to make it for the smart cables. Yes. Then the huge opposition, if you obligated company to install those cables, yes, it's new, you don't know what, there is a huge risk. That's why it may not, but we do want to have that language if someone want to have that, and we provide that kind of discount. We will need to work with our sister agency in the future about data governance. It's really quite new, also on the international level, how to deal with that. But that's why we have this distributed acoustic sensing that you're already using for monitoring and damages of the cable and etc. and etc. So yeah, we will see how it's going, but yeah, we try to put this language, but we really appreciate if something needs to be corrected, but it's not compulsory again.
Great, thanks, Natalia. Okay, let's go to Scott for your thoughts on the compensation rates and fees, and then we'll probably take a break and then get into the removal, recovery, easements parts of the rules. So Scott.
Thank you. My feeling is that the rates are higher than they need to be, and higher than they should be if Oregon wants to remain competitive in landing cables. There's tremendous value in the infrastructure that these cables provide to the state. The citizens of our state, whether they realize it or not, they have great benefits because these cables land in Oregon. The Silicon Forest in Hillsborough touches our lives in ways most of us don't understand and recognize, but there's going to be greater and greater need for connectivity in Oregon, and if we make hindrances to landing cables here, or we make it so it's less attractive to land here than in other states, cables will go. OFC sort of got their start. The first cable came to Oregon because a company wanted to come from Alaska down to connect to the hub of the internet down here. And the second cable came to Oregon because the permitting process in California was going so slowly that they said, we're going to drop a $10 million investment that we have at Monterey Bay, and we're going to resurvey the last half of the cable that was coming from overseas and come to Oregon. And that was because Oregon had a process that was quick, it was reliable, it was certain, and it was simple. And those things, I believe, are changing. I appreciate that the state wants to keep it simple, certain, and reliable, but those have to sort of also be reasonable. Maybe that's the fourth thing that needs to be in that equation is reasonable. The reality is, since Oregon revised their permitting process, and I think the term that's been used is more robust, but this more robust process is going to take more time. It's going to take more expense for cable owners, project developers. And the end result is we still have a cable that will get buried just like it was before, no differently. And so the reality is, and since this process of the more complex application and the knowledge that going forward we're going to have increased fees, there's new cables that are going to Washington. I've heard of 4 projects at least that are going into Washington. Some of the cable owners that are currently in Oregon, when their cables are retired, they're going to go to Washington. I've heard that. And there's other cables that I've heard that are going into California. Since 2021, we have not had a new project that hasn't been already in process. So we have to recognize the facts that right now we're not an attractive place to land a cable. And I think it was reiterated today that the obligation is to generate funds for the Common School Fund. How do you generate funds for the Common School Fund if the process is such that the reality is cables are going to other states?
Okay.
So
thank you, Scott. I appreciate that. All right, well, I think we heard from most RAC members. I see a couple of hands up, so quick responses, Natalia and Dario, before we take a break here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Scott and Sarah and John, for your comments. I just have a quick question. And Scott, you mentioned it's not attractive, it's much more higher. Compare with what? This is my question. If you always refer to 1990, the first cable, yes, it was there. It was simple, yes, simple, just 5,000, nothing else. And the company has a easement for 20 years. And then renew, pay 5,000 another 20 years, 40 years. So yes, that was simple. That was in 1990 when we didn't have so many cables. So when all of you refer it's unattractive, it's higher. Yes, compared to 25 years ago to 5,000, yes, it's higher. But that's why we try to understand what other states are charging. And we did that research to understand for us first. When you look at other states, it's not higher. It's basically minimum. But again, you cannot compare just one method. It's negotiation case by case. So, and that's why I try to understand when you mention it's higher and it's non-attractive, higher to compare with what? Like I'm curious what the average telecommunication company revenue per year. So if you compare that, that's probably very small amount. But again, we try to keep a balance with that. And the second one you mentioned,
Can I just
company
answer?
going, just quick, company go to land cable in Washington or California, please. But like, let's consider that company decide where to land the cable. It's not one factor you consider how much do you need as a fee structure. There is so many other cables, infrastructure there, for what purposes that cable come up, need to be considered. If they want to layer cable now, that's probably reasons behind that. It's not just fee, how much do they need to pay? Because I think company and thinking about strategically long term, not just today, how much they pay. So if they go right now we have 5,000. Why they don't want to land in Oregon right now with 5,000? Probably there is reasons behind that. So when you give that example, you just cannot compare, just one factor why they decided to go to neighbor states with that. That's I want just to mention.
Natalia, one of the cable owners on our board who responded to my request for comments, I asked, do you think $1 per foot would be a reasonable amount? His response was, that's a lot closer to what I pay in Washington and Alaska. So, and I agree with you, Natalia, it's very complex. There's lots of factors that would determine where a cable lands. But the complexity of the application, especially when we get into the encroachment fees, which I don't want to touch on yet, but everything together is what is going to make a cable owner decide Oregon is a good place or Oregon is not. I think Oregon should be doing things to make Oregon more attractive to land cables. And I think the thing that I see as being the best possible thing, you could still raise the rates some, but I think if Oregon had a timeline that said, we will process your application in 4 months or in 3 months or in 6 months, and put a timeline so that cable owners would know that this is a timeline that I can really live with in Oregon. I would suggest Oregon make a small raise to the rates, but also make some effort to make it more attractive by having a fixed timeline where the process will, the cable application will be processed by.
Okay, thank you, Scott. So that predictability and piece is almost more critical. It sounds like the rate's critical too, but the predictability piece. Dario, quick response.
I just wanted to quickly clarify trust versus non-trust obligations. Scott had mentioned, is the obligation for generating revenue for the Common School Fund, but with non-trust lands, DSL's obligations are more towards the public trust uses or values. I don't think there is an obligation to generate revenue for the Common School Fund for the non-trust lands such as the territorial sea. And then the other point would be to clarify about timelines. I appreciate and understand what you said, Scott, about timelines for processing an application. But typically with our proprietary processes, so any type of use of state-owned waterway, other divisions of rules, the department just does not set limitations on itself for review of those types of uses for proprietary uses. So it would be contrary to all of the other ways that we evaluate applications. I understand what you're saying and that it would be attractive or beneficial for this type of use.
And Sylvia, just quick to Daria timeline, because I did ask that question in other state when I follow up. I was curious because I remember you mentioned several times about timelines during our previous meeting, and it was part of the initial interview that we DSL did in 2023 with the company. Yes, but that's why we ask also, do you have timeline in your rules or statutes? And they said no, because in some state, the application process takes up to 2 years because of the complexity. And we don't know how many external factors we can expect. Like you were talking about, Sarah, we're talking about the vessel's availability. And now we have all these things happening with the fuel price. It could be some factor in the future. We don't know. That's why putting a timeline, we understand on your side. And also we talk about the Department of Justice, about the timeline as well. And again, we ask other states if they do have some timeline, and they don't. Yeah, but we also try to understand what factor affect also our decision. It depends when we will get additional information from the company. It depends about the when statement board meeting happening. It depends when we'll get reply from the Department of Justice. Those external factors we cannot control. We only can control our review process, and we try to make it saying at least 180 days. And we try to do our best with that timeline.
Okay, thank you, Natalia, for the context. All right, well, with that, I appreciate all the comments from folks, and this is a lot for DSL to consider in thinking about updating the compensation rates and the application fees, trying to balance Oregon staying competitive, making sure the fees are understandable, but also, compensate Oregonians for use of the territorial sea. So thanks for all the comments. And I think we'll take a break, and then when we come back, Dario and Natalia will provide a little bit more information on decommissioning and recovery and the encroachment easements. So we'll get your comments on those as well. So 10-minute break. It's 10:30. Let's get back together at 10:40 and we'll resume then. We'll get into decommissioning and recovery and the encroachment easements, but I think we're going to go first to the slides. Danielle, Dario, and Natalia will present a little bit on what the process is for decommissioning and recovery and some examples of calculating rates for a couple of projects.
Apologies, I thought we were gonna just finish up that rule language real quick, but I will pull it up now.
Perfect.
I'm not sharing the right thing.
I just want to highlight, please send us, Sylvia, comments, maybe propose specific language, and we will consider all of them for the next RAC meeting when we will provide the revised rules based on all comments. Because we try to find the balance. Sometimes the comments in opposition to each other. So we need to find golden middle, what to consider. Okay, here is, we come up to decommissioning and recovery. Just want to show a kind of global overview, and it's interesting study that was published by Claire and his colleagues bunch of scientists, other scientists, in December 2025. And this is actually the first comprehensive assessment of environmental impact undersea cable decommissioning. And it's interesting because I read this article in February, and today in the morning at 6 a.m., I got a mail notification from ICPC, International Cable Protection Committee, that sent a newsletter about decommissioning and recovery and environmental consideration. And they used the same picture and the same citation for this article because it's really big, first comprehensive assessment. So this slide demonstrates, you could see A and B. It's a graph, how many cables we had in the past century and what is happening right now. And currently, as we discussed, yes, before it was just few cable mentioned because in telegraphic era and telephonic era, but it was a huge boom from 2000 when the fiber optical cables come up and they're increasing. And this is the map, the worldwide, just to show that currently there is more than 3.5 million kilometers of all types of subsea cable. And this is including power cables as well. Almost 2/3 of the global network is now out of services and they require decommissioning work. And I think it's also quite new because when we had the world, the Earth planet had just few cables, it was normal actually to leave cables buried under the seabed. But then you see the growing number, yes, and we understand technology are developing, we need energy, we need to do telecommunication because of the artificial intelligence development and etc. to provide all of those services. But at the same time, we need to consider that we use in the ocean, and this is a space for living for so many creatures, and that provide us necessary ecological system and function for social, economical, and environmental benefits. And the boom for telecommunication cables, the record number, this is new study demonstrate for new telecommunication cable, over the last couple of years, 2023, 2025, which come up with a landing 300,000 kilometers in undersea cable. Then now I think the world in the kind of transition, asking themselves, okay, we need to do something with that old cables. Yes, if we leave them in place, but here is the ocean seabed become more competitive, we need to land some new additional cable, renewable energy are developing. Again, new technical standards for fiber optical cables. We can see, yeah, there's much more progress we can see in that. But we simply cannot leave all those old cables on the seabed. We need to provide that space for the new cable coming up. And there is several reasons for that. One of that is marine spatial planning. We need to provide the new space. We need to consider interaction with the different ocean users who use that ocean for different purposes, and also public as well. We need to consider environmental impact. And this study showed that usually for removal, not always, some cases, and that's why we have that encroachment, we may allow to leave some portion of the cables or infrastructure in place if it's more damaging to the environmental. But also, in addition to marine spatial planning, environmental consideration, there is also a circular economy and sustainable development approach. And the studies show that almost 95% of those old cables could be recyclable because of their materials, copper and steel. And this is also good for the company to have that recycled and receive maybe some compensation. And the next slide. So considering that's next slide, please, overview. You see some couple of photos there. It looks like one cable we can leave it there. But if we look more globally, if we look at big picture and long term, if you see this amount of cables, old cables, they're still in the ocean, and it's not good in the long term for the environmental. They're still decomposed, even if it's maybe 100 years, 1,000 years, but it's still there, and it's still a kind of impact. And that's why now the countries, the states, they're looking at the best way and requirements, how to decommission and remove those cables. For Oregon case, decommissioning requirement, it's not kind of new. It was required by the statute, and it is required by the statute. It's broad requirements, but it's say that at least 180 days before decommissioning, the company, the holder, need to submit decommissioning plan to DSL. We have these requirements as well in the amended Territorial Sea Plan Part 4 that require, considering all those global trends and marine spatial planning that DLCD is planning to do in the future, and we're discussing with all the agency right now the best approach. And we had this new government executive order about climate resilience last year in October that we also need to follow up, and renewable energy facility. It was quite new, several executive orders. So decommissioning now is really the approach we want to go. And we consult with the Department of Justice that, yes, those requirements, they're still in the statute, but DOJ suggests us to a little bit more explicitly state what is actually required in our rules. That's why we have this new section on decommissioning, and we listed numbers of points what should be in the decommissioning plan. And this list that you see before putting them, and of course it will be follow up because this is rule that don't need to have a lot of specific, because it's not easy always to amend rules. We will prepare separate kind of DSL guidelines or instruction, how do you call that, that will have more details. But to come up with this point, DSL, we try to look at example of Europe's, what they require decommissioning plan, and also in the International Cable Protection Committee guidelines, and etc. And that's why we come up that decommissioning plan, when we require, they should have risk assessment of the potential impact, its environmental, social, economical impact, how much does it cost, and description of the proposed methods for decommissioning removal, because there is a different methods to make it less damaging, but again, it depends where the cable is, its sensitive area, and etc. Proposed schedule for decommissioning and restoration work. We do need to see that, because also the state, we have, for example, new management plan for southern resident orca endangered species that really was approved as endangered species. And we need to consider the impact on the marine mammals and the migration time of whales and other animals. So kind of it's important to see that proposed schedule and when the decommissioning work will be done. Of course, description of location and segment of cables or other utilities that may be needed to be left in space for different reasons. And that's why we will be talking about encroachment. And maps, graphics, photo, or anything that can help us to understand the decommissioning work and propose formal financial assurance. And once that decommissioning plan improve and decommissioning work is done, DSL would like to see the post-decommissioning and recovery report again that for different state planning purposes, marine planning purposes, and etc. I think, yes, I already mentioned that decommissioning is required, and that was one of the questions to coastal state we asked, do you require? And the most of them, yes, and they confirmed that it depends. Sometimes it's better to leave some section of the cable in place because of the environmental consideration and all different other factors. And that's why we propose a new section, encroachment, that Daria will be talking on. But I would like to highlight before Daria will start that encroachment. Yes, this is a new section in Division 83. Encroachment was under division, or it's still right now under Division 123 that mentioned, and Territorial Sea Plan Part 4, which will be amended in the future, also mentioned that decommissioning plan should be submitted to DSL according to Division 123. And we try to, again, to find the balance between all different our rules that also need to be amendment in the future. And we consult with the Department of Justice, and the suggestion was that it's better to have separate section in Division 83 explicitly saying what is required, what is the process of that, and not just refer to Division 123 because we didn't have that explicitly saying language in that division. It just mentioned there. Yeah, this is what I want to highlight before the Daria will start to talk about encroachment application process, and he will give a couple of examples again for demonstration purposes how much it will be cost. Yes, Daria, please.
Thanks, Natalia. Yeah, so I just want to run through an idealized encroachment easement application process and show the proposed formula for the fees and the encroachment application fee. So this application process is going to be very similar to the new easement application process, except for a little truncated. It wouldn't have the pre-application meeting requirements in the front. So we would just kind of launch from the application being received by the department to a DSL completeness review, where staff review the application to see if it is complete. And then once it was determined to be complete, we'd move to a public review process where we circulate the application for public review and comment. Once those comments were received and addressed, we'd move to a DSL internal technical review where we work to review the particular details of that application and produce a recommendation. Once that recommendation had been made for that use, we'd move towards, preparing documents for proposed encroachment, and then sending those to the applicant and working on finalizing that. We'd also, after that part, we'd move to, where DSL is reviewing all of the final particulars before it being reviewed by the state land board, where it would get reviewed and approved, and then, executed by DSL if it was reviewed and approved. For the compensation fees for these encroachments, it's a formula that's pretty similar to the new easements. It's just more expensive. You'll see that it's $7 is kind of like the base. And then with the uses that are larger than 3 inches in diameter, there's a scaler there to increase the cost. And for fixtures, it's based on the area of use, so it's a square footage calculation. And if you're going to ask me where did we come up with $7, my response might be it's a little like throwing spaghetti at a wall. You got to start somewhere. I don't know if Natalia might be able to answer this, but I don't know if there was specific information that kind of informed that, but there does have to be a starting point. And then the application fee, I think the the assumption here is that we're dealing with a use that a lot of information is known about, and the process for the application is truncated from like a new use. So it wouldn't take as much staff time, is why the fee is less than, say, a new easement application. And we can go to the next slide and I'll talk about examples. So again, these are real examples. The department that I have found, I've been able to find 2 examples of encroachment easements issued in the territorial sea. So we're just using these examples as demonstration purposes only. I just want to clarify that before I start. This example is from the Jupiter cable or the Edge cable. And this example is from, I believe there was an encroachment easement issued for during the construction of that cable. There was a incident with the installation that required the abandonment of a bore pipe, right? A segment of bore pipe and drilling tools or drilling materials. So that was the example that I'm using here. And the bore pipe length noted in that encroachment easement is 1,170 feet, and the bore pipe diameter was about 6 inches. My understanding is that all of the encroachment is enclosed inside of that area. So it would include like the drilling tools and the fluid and whatnot. If we were using the proposed formula for this encroachment, the compensation would amount to, just less than $5 million. It would also be important to note that these encroachment easements are intended to be permanent, right? So the factor of 100 would be a multiplier for 100 years. You can't really multiply for infinity years. So again, you got to kind of pick something. So we picked 100, and that would be the compensation for this particular use. Next slide. So this is another example of an encroachment easement that the department has for territorial sea related to a fiber optic cable. My understanding is that this is a cable that had an active authorization. Maybe the cable wasn't in service. I'm not exactly sure what the details were, but it was being decommissioned, and the cable holder found that there were certain segments of the cable that were unable to be removed. My understanding from looking at this encroachment easement is that there were 3 portions of cable that were left remaining, and they were weighted down with weights to keep those cable segments in place when they were kind of left after removing the other portions of cable that was possible to remove. I wasn't able to find, the exact diameter of the cable. So my assumption is that it's less than 3 inches, or 3 inches or less. And if you use that to calculate an encroachment for this particular use, the compensation would be around $2,379,000. And again, the intention would be that this would be a permanent easement. So I believe that's it.
Great. Thank you, Dario, Natalia. Appreciate that, those examples and just the description of the encroachment easement application process, and some reasons for why encroachment easements occur and kind of what other states are doing for requiring removal. With that, let's just go to the committee and see if there's any clarifying questions. We want to leave as much time as possible for actually getting to comments on the rules. So, but if there's clarifying questions that you really need an answer to be able to provide your comments, we want to make sure those get answered. So Scott and then Jason.
Yeah, thank you. My question just has to do with that 100-year. I appreciate that you can't say infinity. Is there any language to indicate that the 100 years is the final payment, that this one-off payment that's calculated at 100 years is the one and only payment for abandonment?
Yeah, I believe that the draft rules outline that the encroachment easements are intended to be permanent easements. So it's a
Thank you.
one-time compensation fee for that encroachment, and it would be a permanent. The intention would be for it to be a permanent easement. Yes.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight, we did have an internal discussion with the executive team about that. What should we use for the encroachment? Is it 50 years or is it 100? But yes, it's permanent and we leave this long term. And we come up with a 100 years, so a century for that.
Right. Thanks, Natalia.
Yeah, but you don't need to pay. It will not change. Well, unless some statute will require us to change in the future. But yeah, this is the fix, 100 years.
Thanks. And Jason?
Dario, I missed, did you say that these were just, are these indicative of actual situations where these payments have been made, or was this hypothetical?
So these examples are based off of real encroachment easements that have been issued under Division 123. However, the compensation that was paid for those easements is different than what I marked up. That is for the hypothetical demonstration purpose, right? So these are the parameters or details from real encroachment easements related to territorial sea fiber optic cables assessed under our proposed compensation hypothetical.
Just a couple of thoughts here. I need a reference point. I mean, what did we used to do? Like, how much would this have cost somebody last year? The numbers seems, and the flip side of that coin, the numbers seem rather large, like a $2 million payment to leave, that out and buried in the sand. I don't want, I'm not sure how that, how does that affect the decisions of the company is it a strong incentive to get everything out? I mean, I'm kind of curious, maybe the industry can weigh in on this. How do these numbers, these costs affect the company's thinking about what ends they'll go to try to extract something?
I think that's a fair question because, we would be weighing, are we by making these free, or say if we made these free, for example, right, are we incentivizing leaving unrecoverable material, are we incentivizing that as opposed to are we making it cost prohibitive? So again, like Sylvia had mentioned, there's that balance that we're trying to achieve between kind of both sides of that spectrum. Yeah.
Yeah, just the one additional thought. I mean, I'm thinking about it in terms of I can imagine that a vessel at sea trying to recover this is, that must cost several $1 million over the course of the full extraction. I'm just speculating. I just know the cost of a vessel is not cheap, especially the kind that's capable of pulling out these kind of cables. That's got to be several $100,000 per day just to keep that thing in the water. So I would be curious to hear more about, especially from the industry, in terms of what these costs really are.
Yeah. So maybe a couple of things here. First, Dario would love to hear if you do have actual numbers on what, if any fees were paid for these examples.
Yes, I do. I don't have exact figures off the top of my head, but for this second example, for the AT&T cable, it was somewhere around $70,000. And for the edge encroachment, it was somewhere around 100 something. I can't remember exactly, but these easements were issued under Division 123, and the calculation of the compensation rates is related to the adjacent riparian upland, which, as you could imagine, for territorial sea is difficult to establish that. So it's going to vary wildly between the area, whereas this one was in, one portion of the county and the other one was in another portion of the county. You could have really different easement compensations paid for similar things just based on if they were north or south of each other and what the adjacent riparian upland was, assessed at. So it's a really I mean, in my opinion, it's not a great way to formulate, it's a very challenging I'll say it that way. It's a challenging way to compensate or formulate compensation, which is part of the reason why I think we're not trying to use that method for encroachment easements in the proposed rules.
Okay, that's helpful. And then happy to go to cable owners or industry representatives to hear about cost of decommissioning, and also want to keep in mind what Natalia said before, that most states do require decommissioning, it sounds like, and so these costs are borne across the states, or maybe that's not your experience. That would be helpful to hear. If Sarah, Joanne, anyone wants to speak to that.
Sorry, Sylvia, one other thing, the last thing I wanted to mention for Jason's comment about the previous easements is that those are term easements as well. At some point, those easements will come up for renewal and compensation would need to be assessed again, or they would need to be reauthorized. So is my understanding. So the two examples that we went over are for term easements that have a expiration date on them, as opposed to the proposed rules where they were permanent easements.
Thanks, Sarah, and then Cameron.
So to address sort of the ship question, cost comment, obviously, there are the costs associated here are not just with the cost of an encroachment easement. There is recovery costs. So I believe when we met last time, for example, I gave when we were talking about the survey costs, I gave the example of a survey vessel can be easily $40,000 a day. A ship that would recover cable is a much bigger, much more technical ship that requires a lot more people involved with it. So that is easily 6 figures a day. So you do have, and it's not like you just rip this stuff up at high speed. So you are moving very slowly. So it does take a lot of time. So it could easily equal, if not exceed, the cost of the encroachment to operate a ship to remove the cable out of territorial waters.
Great, thanks. And Cameron?
Daria, let's think about the Edge cable project, which you and I are very familiar with.
Yeah, you're familiar with that one, I know. So grill me.
Yeah, no problem. Obviously, that was you couldn't retrieve that,
Right.
the location there. But kind of going back to a point Sarah made for the new cable install, and the costs of putting in the bore versus the cable. Decommissioning, I'll use that same scenario in Jupiter. You can't pull the bore out similar to what we have with Jupiter. So how does that work with this scenario, the encroachment? Because while you can pull the cable out potentially, you've got a bore sitting under parks and DSL lands. Does that mean that we're going to see a $4.9 million fee to the owner of that bore?
Yeah. So I guess I'd have to say that if there were materials associated with the use that were unable to be recovered, you'd find yourself in a position where you would need an encroachment easement.
So the answer is yes.
I was gonna say, but similarly to the comment before, then we're doing that to protect things in the first place. And so if we're not given a choice, and then that sort of can
in theory,
we're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place here. It's like we're screwed going in or we're screwed going out.
Yes.
And so it's like I want to be sensitive to the fact that obviously if you can remove something, you should. It shouldn't be, nobody wants to just arbitrarily be like, nah, I don't feel like it and leave it behind.
Right.
But if you can't remove it, or if the state doesn't want us to remove it because of the environmental damage, then you're being punished for something outside of your control.
The alternative is, would the state allow trenching across the beach and the near shore, which they do up in Alaska?
Right.
So that's something I think needs to be considered, because that's an extra $5 million maybe that is a big deal.
Yeah, and I'd be curious. I mean, and I know Natalia, in your research, you were asking about compensation rates, but is there any research or information on encroachment easement costs in other states?
No, we didn't ask that question, and it was before actually we include this section. But I did ask, we asked the question, is it decommissioning require? And when I follow up, they said yes. Can you give me an example how much it will be approximately cost? Again, the response is case by case, is negotiable. No one will tell you how much they actually charge for that.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
And that's why the reason like we also didn't include, because it's unlikely that actually they will answer. Though we try to make it simple that avoid trigger points for the states, and like, oh, you know, like defensive mechanism, why they ask that. Yes, decommissioning requirements, we ask and then follow up asking specific question, but it's just general response on that.
Okay. That's helpful. Let's go to Jason and then Scott and Danielle, thanks for pulling up the rules. I think we do want to move as much as possible into getting specific comments on different sections of the rules. Everything you've said definitely relates to the rules, but maybe we can kind of look at these while we're talking. Jason? Or was your hand up from before? You're on mute.
No, I had a question. Scott sort of asked my original question was I was asking about the horizontally directional drilled pipe that's left in place probably by definition, right? Unless you're going to seriously disrupt the littoral environment to remove something like that, 1,000 feet of that. I was curious about that. It seems like a $4 million fee for leaving that pipe in place seems extraordinary. And then I was thinking about the Packway facility, which I believe has 5 of those pipes going out about 1,000 feet. So now we're looking at a $20 million decommissioning for the Packway wave energy test site when they're done. I'm curious about that.
Well, just to clarify again, yeah, Packwave currently does have an easement under Division 83, but my assumption would be that at the time that easement comes for renewal, it would be renewed under a Division 140 authorization. That's my assumption about that use in particular, since we're using that example. So I think it's a little bit outside of the scope of this rulemaking process, because I think it really should be evaluated under like a Division 140 process. But it's a fair question. Like if you have 5 conduits, right, are you going to be stuck with 5 fees for, the cost? That's what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, it is. That question does come to mind. And I also had a question for Sarah, or the industry. When you get out to say 20, 40 miles from shore and the depths are, say 2,000 meters, 3,000 meters, are you still pulling fiber optic cable up out? Are you doing it across the entire Pacific Ocean? Or do you stop at some point?
Oh, no. So we bury the cable basically out to about 1,500 meters water depth, or in the case of like the West Coast, for example, we pretty much will bury it all the way out to the continental shelf. After that, the cable is laid directly on top of the seabed, because once you reach 1,500 meters water depth or lower or more, there's very little that interacts with the cable. Nobody's anchoring there. Nobody's fishing that deep. So you have the sort of natural protections, and you don't have to protect it with burial and additional armoring at that point.
And when you're done, do you pull that cable out?
So I would say, reclamation of subsea cables, sort of this kind of like decommissioning, taking cables out. I don't want to say it's relatively new, but historically, the vast majority of cables have just been left there. And so, reclaiming the cables has become a topic more and more within the last 10 to 20 years, especially due to like the points that were mentioned. There are materials, especially in the fiber optic cables, that are recyclable, that can be reclaimed and used again. So there's different assets. There's a lot of cases where you will reclaim within territorial waters, but you will leave within international waters. Because you also have to remember, especially in the deepest parts of the ocean, we're talking about garden hoses that are sitting on the floor of the ocean. It's not like it's this vast swath of systems that are taking up a ton and ton of space. It's like if you added up all the subsea cables in the world, all these 330 million kilometers of cable, it equals actually, in terms of like actual space on the sea floor, it's like 1%. It's actually a tiny amount of space.
Thanks, Sarah. And Scott and Joanne, I see your hands up, but I know Cameron, you have to leave early, so I just wanted to give you a little jump in. If you have any specific comments on the decommissioning, recovery, encroachment easement rules, the fees, or anything you wanted to share before you have to go.
I think I've expressed my thoughts on the fees, with the HDD bores and the like. So that part. Otherwise, I've no comments. To put Sarah's point, this is becoming a standard BMP in many areas. Recovery of a cable. I think a practical approach on that. And one thing I am finding more and more is cables, while an easement might be allocated for a 25-year timeline or thereabouts, or a cable lifespan, maybe 25 years, many operators are using those cables beyond the 25 life year period. So flexibility and decommissioning is encouraged. But otherwise, thank you very much, Sylvia.
Great, thanks, Cameron. Scott, over to you, and then Joanne.
Yeah, I just wanted to provide a little history, being the oldest guy in the room here, I think. One of the first two cables landed in Oregon, I should say the first two in the more modern area, the digital cables, was landed at Nadona Beach, and they used beach trenching, which was what Cameron was mentioning is done in Alaska. And this site had been researched because I know the engineers that were involved. They had researched and they found that this was a stable beach and they didn't have a lot of sand migration on it. And sure enough, within 2 years after the beach trenching, this is where they take backhoes on the beach and they dig a trench and dig it as deep as they can. But you can imagine on the beach that there's only so far you can go. They trench all the way out into the water. Within 2 years of that happening, the cable was at the surface because the sand had migrated offshore, and they had it wasn't an environmental disaster in terms of contamination or everything, but it was a visual nightmare for that beach. The cable company had to quickly come and they put sandbags over it to protect it until the sand came in and they were able to redo it. Anyway, there's a reason that we bore, and the reason is we don't want those cables to come to the surface. Since that event happened, no cable in Oregon has been installed with the beach trenching method. So I thought that was worth knowing. It's a good thing for a cable. It costs a lot more money to trench it than it does to do a directional bore than to trench it. But ultimately, it's, I think, better for the state. And I think the state should recognize that. And my proposed language would be that the cost for the encroachment fee would not include a fee for the bore pipe. I think that is, the value to the state of having the infrastructure come in is worth eliminating the fee for encroachment should that cable need to be abandoned at the end of its life. I've heard that in cases where the bore pipes are good, they pull a cable out and they put a new one in through the same bore. But if you had to pay these horrendous fees for encroachment for a pipe that's buried 60, 80 feet under the sea, under the surf where it goes under, there's no way to get that out. So there's simply no easy method for recovering the pipe once it's there, and it harms no one. So I think my proposal is that you simply eliminate the fees for encroachment for a bore pipe.
For the bore pipe. Okay, thanks for the history and for that suggestion. And I assume that industry folks would agree with that suggestion to remove the encroachment fee for the bore pipe. And I would be curious to hear if others have a contrary view, as DSL considers comments from the RAC. Would you be supportive of including an encroachment fee on the bore pipe or not, and why? But I'll go to Joanne first and then maybe see if others have thoughts on that.
Yep. So I had 2 points. One of them was Scott addressed, which is bore pipes can be reusable. They also can sit between two cables for a period of time. When one cable is removed, it could sit empty for a few years before the next cable is brought in. So it's infrastructure that's quite useful, and it lasts usually much longer than the lifespan of one cable. And then the second thing I'd like to point out is the example that Dario used. I think it would be more relevant if you showed, for example, you showed the easement for Bifrost, to show the encroachment easement for Bifrost if it stayed in place. And because when you're putting in, and I know this because this is what I do for my organization, is if I'm putting in for an approval to secure a permit, I have to show worst case. So I'm showing how much the permit costs, as well as all the conditions to meet the permit. So that I would also have to include the encroachment. And I think if you run those numbers, you'll see that the encroachment permit, if for the example presented, if the Bifrost cable was kept in place, is very, very large.
Yeah.
That's helpful. Thanks, Joanne. And maybe just to delve in on that, I hear you needing to show the worst case cost. So you mean like if the entire length of the Bifrost cable had to stay in place? And is that actually
so the example was given of how much potentially the Bifrost cable would cost, the easement for the Bifrost cable. Well, I would also, if I was putting in for approval, would have to show worst case. Okay, what if we have to leave it in place? How much will that cost? That's part of the overall liability that we have for this cable, and that would have to be shared with, as almost all cables that landing in Oregon are consortium cables. There are groups of companies that come together to decide where they're going to land the cable, and everybody would have to be okay with that overall cost.
Mm-hmm.
That's because consortiums are built on agreements. Everybody has to agree to move forward with all the parts of the cable.
Okay. All right, that's helpful. Great. But I wonder if anyone has thoughts on that suggestion to, exempt the bore pipe from the encroachment fee, for example. Not saying that that's the direction we're moving in, but just sort of speaking in the space. What do folks think about that as a proposal? And yeah, maybe quick responses to that, and then we'll keep moving.
If I may, my reaction is I don't know that the right number is 0. But 4 million on the other hand seems there's quite a delta there. I think we could find something that will put money into the state's coffers, but at the same time wasn't a disincentive or just punitive almost.
Okay. Sarah?
Sorry, I had to get off mute. So obviously, I'm going to be a fan of exempting the bore pipe. But in general, what I would say, and maybe this can help us bridge a gap, is so ultimately what I think those of us on the industry side, those of us who are building these cables, and it's regardless of sort of what infrastructure it is, everyone wants to make sure that you don't wind up with a punitive kind of thing, a punitive cost for something that may be outside of your control based off of, worsening environmental impact if you remove it, if you can't remove it, something like that. So sort of having sort of these kind of clearly defined criteria up front at time of application that can help determine what that impact may be at end of life may help. Like no one knows what's going to happen over 25 years. You can't predict it. But if you are able to do things like, burial depth is achieved, then there should be certain clarifications there that are brought in that you're like, hey, you've achieved burial depth of 1 meter or below. Based off of that, in these sections, encroachment fee may not have to apply or it's lessened. Environmental sensitivity, you're in an area that is been determined is not good to be removed, and maybe that happens after the fact. Maybe somebody puts a marine sanctuary on top of your cable after the fact, which is outside of your control, and you can't move it. You shouldn't be penalized for that fact. So for something that it is beneficial to leave in place, making sure that there is a reasonable cost structure for that. And similarly, sort of, if you're able to monitor the fact that the cable has remained buried, that it is inert, that it doesn't have any public interaction or public impact whatsoever, then be able to take that into account as well. Where a cable can be removed, remove it. There are going to be sections that you're not able to bury as well that are going to be more accessible. But where it truly is negatively impactful for the environment to remove, then don't make it harder on parties trying to put these cables into place by us having to think, hey, I've got, if I had to leave, like, I think we did the calculation actually in here on the cost structure. So if you just had a straight line, the 3 nautical miles, which we talked about last time, nobody does straight line, but let's say it is, and you had to leave a straight line 3 nautical mile in there at $7, you're looking at $38 million over 100 years. That's going to undermine any business case anybody's got. So wanting to sort of look at the extremes and make sure that we are reasonable in this is going to be beneficial for everyone.
Okay, that's great. And I just want to make sure, Scott, I see your hand up, but I think Lene may have dropped off. Eric, I just want to hear just some from others that we haven't heard from. Anything that's coming up for you on the costs or just removal in general?
I mean, again, sort of representing my sector here, I don't know that we have a ton of opinions about the language here. I do generally agree that things that make good business sense, like leaving conduit in the ground so somebody else can use it, makes intuitive sense, but that's just my gut.
Okay, that's helpful. Scott and then Natalia, did you have a response to something that was just said?
Yeah, thanks, Sylvia, and thank you to everyone for those comments. Useful. I agree, bore pipe can be reusable for other cables, but let's say, just interested in your opinion, for example, with H cable, everything left inside the bore pipe, if we remove this, basically we don't have a mechanism how we can charge for the encroachment, because if bore pipe is not included in the encroachment, it's just cable. But we had that one case that everything was left and they were not able to remove from that bore pipe, right, to clean it up. This is my understanding from that experience. So I'm wondering, what is your opinion about that? If we can have some kind of outlier, this kind of case.
Yeah. And Scott, I promise we'll get back to you. But Sarah, did you have a response to that?
Yeah, I would argue that because that is an outlier, that is not the scenario that we should be basing the rules upon. Because it was a scenario where, they tried to put the bore pipe in, the bore pipe failed. And in that scenario, I would argue that it's an asset that has to be left in place. It's non-usable, that there should then be a fee associated with that, because it isn't even being used for the actual cable itself. They had to go in and they had to build another bore pipe in order to make it work. Just basically they did it right in the same place. So it's within the same easement. But so I wouldn't want us to get necessarily distracted by that type of outlier, which is very rare. The fact that something fails to that degree is incredibly rare.
Okay, and I see Joanne nodding her head as well.
Yes, it's a very rare situation, extremely.
Okay, thanks. And Scott?
Yes, I wanted to speak up on behalf of the coastal communities in Oregon that have ocean outfalls, because these rules apply to pipes as well as to cables. And I think of Twin Rock Sanitary District, for example. They worked with us a little bit. We put use our notification system to notify fishermen about a new outfall that they put in. I'm not sure if their old one failed. I assume that's what the case was, but that community has about 700 homes that they serve, and their outfall goes out about a half a mile, roughly 3,000 feet, I think. I don't know if it's a 10-inch or a 12-inch, but just taking a 10-inch pipe, I think at abandonment, I believe the calculation was something like $21 million for the if they have to abandon it at some point. And that would fall on the 700 households of the Twin Rock Sanitary District. And I know that there's ocean outfalls in Oceanside and in Rockaway has an outfall as well. So I think these fees are just if the outfall fails, maybe there's an earthquake and it shifts and it has to be replaced. That seems very, very punitive on those people, and I think this is way too severe.
Thanks, Scott.
I think the point I'm trying to say is I think you're going to see a lack of investment when the risk is these huge punitive encroachment fees are present.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing attention to that other kind of use. And Eric, I see your hand up. So Dario and then Eric.
I appreciate what you're saying, Scott. I had reviewed all of the territorial sea easements that the department has in preparation for this rulemaking, and I did notice several uses issued under the Division 123 for outfalls, but the ones that I had seen were very small, like in area or use. So I'm not aware of any that extend as far as what you're saying into the territorial sea. So if there are uses like that, I don't know if they're authorized. If you want to tell me where they're located, I will do my best. But it would also help really just to, the bigger picture that I can understand about or the department can understand about what uses are out there. So the more information that we have.
And Eric.
So I appreciate Scott raising that. That's the one that I had not considered, but we do have a large industrial customer in our service area that has an ocean effluent outfall. So I would be very curious about the cost that might be associated with the scenario that Scott brought up. I think that's a good point.
That's helpful.
Eric, you can also tell me where that is located, and I can check to make sure it's properly authorized.
I mean, it should not be a secret that there's an industrial outfall off of Naya Beach associated with a pulp mill in Lincoln County.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe it would be helpful to see and look into that, Dario, if you can find out how far that goes into the territorial sea.
Yeah, I'm not trying to indicate that these might be unauthorized uses or something. I'm just trying to indicate that I'm not aware of a large number of Division 123 easements in the territorial sea, or the ones that I found are very small, like in area of use.
It's possible that it fits somewhere else, but that would be edifying to know anyway. And if it does apply under this rule, then the types of costs that Scott was just mentioning would be, I think, contrary to the intent of the law and would be punitive in terms of trying to spur economic development.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. All right. Well, let's see. Since we have the rules up, I'm curious if anyone has any specific comments on. We've talked quite a bit about fees and compensation. I think we probably have the group's sense on that, but maybe moving into the decommissioning plan or the process for an easement application, any of the other things that we haven't kind of covered as much. And we can jump around these sections of the rule to make Danielle's life a little harder. If you have something you want to jump to. Yes, Sarah, go ahead.
I just think in general, sort of in line with everyone, I think that removal, the way that the rules are written basically mandates removal. So having language in there that does provide sort of an addressing of the reality of the situation, that things aren't always able to be removed. It's too sort of complicated for me to be able to sort of say right now because of all the back and forth that I had with my legal and going over this concept. But I've got a bunch of recommendations for you that I will send in via writing, in line with what I mentioned before. So, having the rules basically allow potentially a perspective finding based off of established criteria, wanting to make sure that, if we can satisfy the criteria and that we want the consequences at end of life to be straightforward, and not punitive. So I've got stuff that I can send your way on that.
Great, that's helpful. Thanks, Sarah. Anyone else? You can kind of just scroll, and if folks are coming up with anything, I'll let Danielle finish typing there. So we have this section on decommissioning and recovery, with the decommissioning plan. Maybe we can kind of keep scrolling down to the encroachment easement application process itself in 0853. Oh yeah, Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, I just was going to point out that I believe the OPAC recommendation on TSP Part 4 did include a provision for leaving, while the recommendation is to remove cables, there is a provision, I think, in the OPAC recommendation on TSP Part 4 that said there's cases where it may be needed or necessary to leave a cable and to leave infrastructure in place.
Great, that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. And it was included to be aligned with the territorial sea plan part 4. There is a language there, yes.
Okay. Well, let's scroll down to the encroachment easement application process and see if people have any comments there. Again, this, like Dario said, this process is pretty similar to a new easement application, but truncated quite a bit. Doesn't require the upfront public review process. But any additional comments on the application process? Okay, not seeing
Yeah.
any. Oh yeah, Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, one more thing isn't really on the encroachment process, but on the renewal, we kind of jumped past that, and I forgot to make a comment. But I thought the renewal of an existing cable that's in place should be, it seems like it should be just a simple one-page thing. I have a hard time wrapping my head around a complete process for renewing an application for a cable that's already in place. And I think we discussed at our last meeting about the desirability of increasing the term to be more consistent with the life of a cable. And I think that will help. But I can imagine a scenario under the draft proposed rules here that a company would get to its 20-year life or close to the 20-year life of the cable and have to really weigh whether they want to go through the renewal process or just terminate. And so I think it seems like it would make more sense. You probably would, in the end, get more revenue on a initial 25-year term or even a 30-year term that could be paid up front, and then the cable could go to its natural end of life and be recovered, and not have everyone, including state staff, have to monkey around with a review application and a renewal application and review. Just seems like there's no point. The cable's installed. The renewal should be just almost a one-pager.
Okay. So simplify and reduce costs there. Thank you, Scott. Jason, and I think did we cover renewal applications at the last meeting? I think maybe we mentioned we didn't get to. I can't remember now, but anyway, Jason, go ahead.
Indeed.
I was confused, I guess, by the language here in the very beginning of it, 1A and B. So you have a applicant to renew a term. Nothing's changed in terms of the piece of equipment that's in the ground. Everything sort of just remains the same as I can imagine. But then A and B talk about you can amend the terms and condition of the easement, and B, amendments may be subject to JART. So what amendments to what? If the amendments are presumably to the terms of the renewal easement, those are presumably um, put in there by the state, in which case the state's triggering a JART and a public review by virtue of changing their terms of the new easement. The language to me is just a little confusing. I'm not quite sure how that really works out there. What's happening?
Thanks. Dario, do you have a response there?
Yeah, I'd just say that this is part of the reason for the renewal application review process. When they talk about in 1A, the department may amend terms and conditions of the easements at time of the renewal. The example I'd give is that our easements from the early 2000s don't mention, decommissioning and recovery requirements, right? That are now included in our current easement template. So sometimes things that the department says or feels are important aren't addressed in initial authorization. So maybe those are kind of updated terms and conditions that might be added or included to these easements at the time of renewal. And amendments, regarding the use, it's possible that, these are always times that the department can check in with the easement holder and just verify, hey, is this actually in the place that we both think that this is in? Is this the use that we both think is occurring, right? Just to verify that. And if there are no changes to the area of use, the location of the use, we just would renew it. But if there are changes, that's an opportunity to make those amendments that might be needed, if that helps clarify things.
And I think, as I recall, we did discuss this a little bit, because I think the tenor of my comments was that in an existing easement, for purposes of a renewal, ought to remain more or less on the same terms as were originally negotiated. The analog being sort of a grandfathered use and land use. You build a building, for some reason you need to re-permit it for commercial use or something, and the new standards apply. Would you be required to implement those new changes to the building? You mentioned, for example, decommissioning. So we have new standards for decommissioning. So if a company were to come to the end of their useful life, well, come to the point where they were considering renewal, if it now requires decommissioning as new terms for the continuation, if I was the company, I would just go ahead and abandon them under the current terms, because I wouldn't incur the what potentially could be millions of dollars of decommissioning and place fees. I'm just sort of thinking out loud of a scenario about how new terms would affect decisions to extend the life of these projects. So I'm just a little wary about applying new requirements that were, especially substantive requirements that were not part of the original deal.
All right, thanks, Jason. I know it's about 11:45 here too. I'm just going to do a quick check to see if any members of the public were planning to make public comment, because if not, we can keep going with this conversation, but want to give that opportunity. If you were a member of the public and want to make a comment, just go ahead and raise your hand so I know. Don't see anything, so I think we can just keep going. And yeah, let's stick. It sounded like there weren't a lot of comments on the encroachment easement application process. Just pause for a second to see if anyone has any. Yeah, if not, let's maybe move into, well, I think we got a lot of comments on the encroachment easement application fee and compensation, which is 0856. So I think we're good there. There were a few sections that you didn't get presentation on today, but they're still in the rules and want to get comments. So maybe we'll flash those up and see if there's anything on the financial assurance requirements on 0857. Sarah, yeah.
Yeah, just real quick, we just want to make sure that the rules specify the acceptable instrument types and a process for the applicant to propose alternatives. Simply because right now it's just sort of very open and it's to the department's sole discretion, which is a risk. So we're looking for clarity here.
Okay, so clarity in the instrument types.
Yep.
Security
Yeah. Specifying acceptable instrument types and a process for an applicant to propose an alternative if warranted.
Okay. Others, any other comments on the financial assurance requirements, which are really just about making sure that the applicant will perform in accordance with their terms?
I have a question. Is this language any different than what would apply to other sectors? Is it pretty standard, like what you require, surety bond, cash deposit, or certificate of deposit? This is pretty general. It's nothing different for this sector than another sector.
Yeah, Natalia, if I'm not mistaken, you took it from the new Division 82 rules.
It was before by default. It's not kind of new. We always require financial assurance, but when we review amendment of other rules, which is currently happening, to be aligned with the same languages, we just put this. And thank you so much to clarify, and if we need to elaborate more on something here.
Great, thanks. All right. Well, let's skim down then too. There's two other new sections here. One is on unauthorized uses and penalties, and the other is on appeals of decisions. So just a couple of phrases here on uses and penalties, see if there's any comments.
I'm sorry, I'm not raising my hand here. I am. What is the trigger? This is new language. We didn't have this before. Is there an example of an unauthorized use that has occurred that convinced the state that we need additional language to cover this situation?
Dario, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that there are unauthorized uses that occur in state-owned lands and waterways all the time. Not typically, I would say, in the territorial sea, but I think this is just like what happens if the easement expires, there's no encroachment easement, right? What if those processes all kind of fell down? What would be the outcome? And it would be, that would be an unauthorized use.
Yeah, and with this language, it also appeal of decision, as additional to as Dario mentioned, we did consult with the Department of Justice. What should we include it and what type of language from the legal perspective? But the penalty was there in the current Division 83 that we're still amending. We're still in the process. An appeal of decision. It just was renamed from reconsideration of decision that it was before, but again, to be aligned with the other administrative rules that currently under the amendment as well, and Department of Justice suggestion.
Did that answer the question, Jason?
I think so, yes. Well enough, and I guess I was confused a little bit. I was thinking about the Dario's example was, someone who doesn't seek and they go put something in the water or somewhere that's, a big picture unauthorized use versus a company that has left something in place and is subject. So this language appears to apply to both of those, and that makes sense.
All right, thanks. Sarah?
There we go, off mute. Nothing on the unauthorized user uses and penalties, but on the appeal of decision, we would suggest restoring a 30-day window instead of the 20 calendar days, to make it more consistent with standard administrative practice, and it allows adequate time to evaluate adverse decisions.
All right, great. Thanks, Sarah. Anything else from others on appeal of decision? I think Natalia said before that this used to be called, that the section was renamed, but that there was this kind of rule in place earlier. Is that right, Natalia?
Yeah, not explicitly broad as it is. Yeah, but it was called reconsideration of decision.
Yeah, reconsideration, right.
Yeah, but we have appeal of decision in other rules, so we try to find the balance and to be aligned with that.
Mm-hmm. All right. All right, well, I'm not seeing any other hands. So I think we kind of got through all the rules. We did want to go back to purpose and applicability, general provisions, and definitions. I don't know if we need to flash those up on the screen, but did anyone here have comments that they wanted to make to those very introductory sections of the rules? I think I'd say if you have any, just go ahead and send them in by email. I know earlier there were some recommendations to add some additional definitions or to clarify a few things in applicability. So those have been received by DSL, but welcome any other comments there. With that, I think we're ready to move into next steps.
All right. Thank you, Sylvia. Thanks for everybody. It's been a great meeting, lots of good conversation. If you remember, the email that Sylvia sent out last week had a survey for identifying a new date for that May 27th meeting, which there's an offshore wind energy meeting that DLCD is conducting at the same time, and Natalia is going to be there, and we think a couple of y'all are going to be there. So Sylvia has put in the chat a link for rescheduling. We've just identified dates. They're all the first week of June. Because of timing, I don't want to go beyond that, but we've given you morning, afternoon, a couple of different days. And if you could just fill that out, she's also going to include it in the follow-up email for next week. But that would be super helpful for us. And we're going to accommodate as many people as possible. So the majority will that's where we'll schedule the meeting for. As much as it'd be great to, accommodate everybody. But again, that's that. We really ask for you to fill that out. In the next week, again, like always, a meeting summary will be sent to the RAC members, and today's meeting recording will be posted. Prior to the next meeting, agenda will be sent, and at the next meeting, we're going over any outstanding issues, like any rules that we need to finish up with, and discuss components of the notice of proposed rulemaking. Now, if we can get through all of that, like the notice of proposed rulemaking, those components are the last things that we need y'all to look at. So if we can get through all of that next meeting, we won't need the 5th meeting, but we want to make sure we have a time in case we need the 5th meeting. We want to make sure we have a time that fits for y'all. And again, as always, all meeting materials are posted to the DSL rulemaking website. Any questions about what's coming up next?
Actually, I have a question, Danielle, just to clarify.
Yes.
Will RAC members receive an updated set of rules before the next meeting? That might be a question for Natalia and Dario.
It depends on if they make updates to the rules in the meantime. So right now, you saw I just recorded comments about some of the rules, and we haven't made any changes to the draft rule text. So if during the internal discussion of outstanding comments from y'all, and anything today, if Natalia decides that we need to make edits or make edits to anything we haven't looked at, we will send an updated set of draft rules. But as of now, there's not a plan unless we make updates, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, Eric?
I don't want to be annoying, but I think I might have just briefly missed my opportunity to make to raise my concern about the director's ability to determine. So there's a list of exemptions in the first section that seem appropriate. But 4 says the director may determine that uses and structures similar to those specified in these rules also require authorization under these rules. So it basically grants the director a carte blanche authority to ignore the exemptions. So I had submitted this in writing, but I think that the language needs to be tightened up around what authority the director has to determine that items are subject to the rules that clearly aren't subject to the rules and are listed in the exemptions. But it gives a pretty big caveat for the director to just determine otherwise.
Great. Thank you, Eric, for getting that on the record. And we have the email too, so appreciate that. No problem. You did not miss your opportunity. Thanks for bringing it.
So, Eric,
Dar-
I have a question, Eric. Are you looking for an expansion of director authority or a restriction of director authority?
A restriction of director authority. So what's listed in the exemption is straightforward. So I can't imagine a scenario where the director would need to otherwise determine that those exempted items are subject to the rule. But as written, it gives the director the authority to just determine that they are. And I don't think that's the intent, and that's outside of the statutory authority. But there's no reason to just write it loosely.
So typically for like other rule sets that we have this type of exemption, this language, similar language in, the idea is like there's this use that conforms to these rules, but isn't exactly what is identified, right? And the director can say, hey, this is close enough, it fits in here. This is the right place for it to be. Is that, I'm just telling you how I think that it's typically, seen. And I'm wondering about your thought on that.
So in this specific context, it lists what is not subject to the rule. And it says, unless otherwise determined by the director under subsection 4. Subsection 4 says the director may determine that uses and structures similar to those specified in these rules also require authorization under these rules. So that's the part where I understand what you're saying. If the director's authority was going to be more permissive and allow for facilitation of common sense. But in this case, it seems to give the director the authority to subject things to these rules that are not otherwise subject to the rules.
So you're saying like, hey, there's a energy facility that fits in a different category of rules, and the director says, nope, you got to go in here. And
yeah, I mean, that's
right?
an exact use case. PackWave, I think we all agree that PackWave is not subject to these rules. But as written, the director could say that's similar to other things that is subject to these rules.
So something to clarify, the director can put things that fit in this box in here, but the things that don't fit in, no.
Correct.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Well, anything from others on next steps? All right. Well, appreciate all of your time. And we'll see you in May at the next meeting, and fill out that poll if you haven't already so we can reschedule the June meeting. Thanks, everyone. Have a good